The highway was silent sirens slicing through the air. Cole pressed his face against the window, sneering, "You think that cheap military ID makes you a man?" Maya held his gaze, each word sharp. "You're overstepping your authority." Briggs exhaled, smoke shrugged. "Authority, out here the cops are God, and you're just a black statistic in a report." The insult landed like a blade, triggering a chain reaction with no way out. The highway stretched endlessly like a strip of heated steel under the harsh midday sun. The space was so vast that any sound was swallowed whole, leaving only the hum of engines and the shimmer of heat rising from the asphalt. Maya Johnson's SUV moved steadily and silently, its windshield flashing in the light, and behind the wheel she focused with familiar calm. The road was deserted, no signs of violations, no reason for a returning soldier to stop in this empty place. Yet, in the rear-view mirror, flashing blue and red lights suddenly pierced her vision like a blade. A siren blared through the stillness, long and sharp, thickening the already stifling air. Maya tilted her head slightly, drew a deep breath to stay calm, then gradually eased off the gas. The patrol car stayed tight behind her, its lights pulsing in metallic rhythm. Officer Cole sat inside, gripping the steering wheel, his eyes locked in a hostile stare as if the target had already been chosen. He didn't glance at the dashboard, didn't care for a reason to stop the car. All his focus locked on the SUV ahead like a predator shadowing its prey. As Maya pulled over, her tires screeched against the sun-softened asphalt dust rising in lazy swirls. She placed both hands neatly on the wheel, her heartbeat pounding, but her face stayed composed. It wasn't the first time she'd been pulled over, but something about this moment pressed hard against her chest. The strobe of blue and red reflected in the mirror like a bad omen, signaling something far from routine. The patrol car door flung open with a shrill screech. Cole stepped out of his shadow, stretching across the scorched pavement. His boots landed heavily, each step crushing into the softened road, one hand adjusting the belt where his gun peeked into view. He walked straight to Maya's window, didn't knock politely, but slammed the side of his fist against the glass. The sound crashed through the quiet like a fracture. His voice hissed through clenched teeth, short and laced with contempt. "Out of the car, you black bitch, your papers won't save you." Each word hit with hot breath, part command, part drowning insult. Maya rolled the window down, the heat rushing in against her face, but she didn't flinch. In a slow, deliberate motion, she pulled her license from her wallet, lifted her head, and passed it through the gap. Her voice was low and steady, firm in every word. "I haven't broken any law." That aloneness gave her words weight, not a plea, but a declaration. Cole glanced at the license, then looked back up, his bloodshot eyes fixed, as if determined to crush that calm where it stood. From behind, Officer Briggs also stepped out of the car. Unlike Cole, he didn't rush, arms folded across his chest, wearing a crooked grin that was half mockery, half delight. He stood slightly to the side, his sunglasses reflecting the image of Maya sitting upright behind the wheel. Briggs let out a slow chuckle, dragging out the last syllable, his voice sweetly fake but venomous. "Around here, your skin color decides your guilt." The words echoed across the wide open space, dropped onto the scorching pavement, then bounced back into Maya's mind, striking like a blow to her dignity. Maya inhaled deeply, feeling sweat slide down her temple, only to dry instantly in the heat. She didn't respond right away, letting silence take over, a thick silence born not of fear, but of calculation. Every second weighed in a moment, wound tight as wire. Cole tapped his fingers on the gun grip, his eyes flashing something cruel, while Briggs kept his arms crossed, smirking like a man watching a dull play whose ending he already knew the weaker one bows. But Maya didn't bow. In her eyes was a calm forged through decades of discipline, through life or death missions, through countless silent confrontations with mortality. The sun hung high, casting sharp light that stretched Cole's shadow long and crooked across the road, draping over the SUV. The only sound left was the cicadas humming somewhere far off in the fields, mixed with the faint clink of metal as Cole tightened his belt. Briggs lit a cigarette, the smoke mingling with the heat into something suffocating. Maya sat still, her hands now slick on the steering wheel, but her gaze didn't waver. She knew this wasn't about checking the document. It was a show of force. They weren't looking for a violation. They were hunting for a moment to dominate, a way to prove that even a law-abiding citizen could be humiliated for nothing more than the color of her skin. In that moment, everything seemed to freeze. Dust hung in the air, motionless sunlight splitting into sharp beams that pierced the windshield. Cole leaned closer, his breath short and hot in the narrow space between him and Maya. Briggs exhaled smoke curling through the air like punctuation for his contempt. Overhead, a bird let out a sharp cry and took off, leaving the space emptier than before. Maya drew another breath, steadying herself for what was coming, knowing those first words had already set something in motion that wouldn't stop easily. Cole clenched his jaw, his voice low and tight with anger not yet spent. Briggs smirked, waiting for Maya to flinch or explain herself, but Maya sat upright, her eyes cold and steady, refusing to look away. That silence was like a blade sheathed, not drawn, but enough to rattle them. The highway remained deserted, no witnesses, no interruptions. Just sun dust and three people trapped in a spiral of power where a single word or glance could ignite the whole thing. In Maya's mind, memories flickered the underwater training when her breath was crushed by pressure, but she still kept rhythm to survive. Or the nights crossing pitch-black forests so silent she could hear her own heartbeat, yet she remained steady with every step. Those experiences returned, now anchoring her calm in front of two men who treated her skin color as a joke. The license was still in Cole's hand. Briggs's smirk still lingered, but Maya knew this power game was only beginning, and she was ready to step into the confrontation, even knowing the path ahead would lead to wounds, blood, and the unknown. The sun scorched the asphalt, casting blinding streaks of light across the car windows. The air pulsed like a furnace, turning each breath into effort. Maya had stayed calm after the initial stop, but the tension spiked when Officer Cole gave her no time to think. He yanked the car door open with a harsh, sudden motion, the hinges screeching in protest. His rough hand grabbed Maya's arm and pulled her out without hesitation. The iron grip of a man used to control clamped down like a vice, dragging her upright from the driver's seat. The jolt made her stagger slightly, but she dug her feet into the burning pavement to stay balanced. Cole snatched the wallet from Maya's hand with the force of a broad daylight thief. He rummaged through it as if searching for something incriminating, though his real aim was humiliation. His eyes lit up when he spotted a card glinting in the sun, the metal edge catching light. It was Maya's military ID, a symbol of her honor she always carried. But Cole didn't see it as proof of service to the nation. He grabbed it, scoffed, and flung it to the ground like trash. The card hit the asphalt with a faint clink and lay there glinting even brighter. Cole leaned in and hissed every word sharp and bitter. "Don't bother showing off. You're no soldier to me." The air thickened. Something drove straight into Maya's sense of pride. It wasn't just a personal insult. It was a denial of every year she'd sacrificed, every grueling training, every life-risking mission she had survived. Her chest tightened, shame rising to her throat. Maya clenched her jaw, eyes flashing, but she refused to scream. Drawing a deep breath, she spoke in a low, steady voice, each word cutting through the heat. "You're overstepping your authority." The words didn't echo, didn't shake, but they landed heavy like a stone, dropped into a deep well, sending ripples far and wide. Briggs still stood planted behind, arms folded across his chest, his shadow stretched long across the road by the sun. His face was veiled in cigarette smoke, but his smirk was clear. He stepped forward, voice slow, dripping venom into Maya's ear. "Out here, the police are the law, and you, just a black decoration." The cruelty in his words didn't come from one man alone, but from an entire system that treated power as a privilege and someone else's dignity as something to crush beneath their boots. Maya lowered her eyes slightly to the ID card lying on the ground, the flash of light off its edge a sharp reminder of what she had once fought to protect. A memory flickered, her swearing-in ceremony, her hand on the flag, the promise to defend this country with all her strength and belief. And now, right in front of her, that oath had been thrown to the ground, trampled all because of the color of her skin. A wave of anger surged, but she held it back. She knew that if she exploded now, everything would play out exactly how they wanted it to, turning her into the aggressor. Cole glanced down at the card, then nudged it away from Maya's feet with the tip of his boot. His eyes lit with satisfaction, a crooked smile stretching across his face. Briggs remained with his arms folded, head tilted slightly as if studying her, waiting to see how she would react. They both waited for her to break, to shout, to dive for the card. But Maya stayed still, her gaze pulled tight like a wire, her back held perfectly straight. The sun burned bright, but the shadows of Cole and Briggs fell heavy over her, swallowing her figure. The air grew thicker, the shrill cries of cicadas over the scorched grass underscoring the dead silence. Sweat slid down her back, but her eyes never left Cole's. In this moment, the confrontation was no longer about paperwork or infractions. It was about dignity, about the right to exist. Cole leaned in, his voice lower now but more venomous than ever. "You think that uniform means anything out here? Out here? One word from me makes you guilty." Briggs let out a short, sharp laugh, rough as stone, scraping metal. Maya heard every word clearly, let them echo inside her, then swallowed them like swallowing a blade. Her eyes reflected something that couldn't be crushed, a quiet fire that burned steadily. Wind swept across the dry fields, carrying with it the smell of smoke and dust. In the distance, the faint sound of a truck engine came and went. There was no one to witness this, no one to stop the degradation unfolding. Maya stood there alone, facing two men drunk on power. Her military ID still lay on the asphalt, glinting with every heartbeat like it pulsed with her own. Cole and Briggs kept digging deeper with their words, but Maya had already chosen to hold her composure as her final weapon. The midday heat thickened the airwaves rising from the pavement and curling around her feet. Cole kept growling, Briggs kept smirking, but Maya remained standing tall, spine unshake, eyes like arrows shot back at their contempt. It was a moment where silence became the sharpest response, denying them the collapse they craved. And that silence only made what came next more brutal, because Cole wouldn't stop at tossing the card. He would want more. He would want total submission. But Maya had made up her mind she would not give him that. The empty road stretched endlessly, flanked by withered yellow grass and dry shrubs rustling in the wind, whispering like distant voices. The midday sun blazed overhead, turning the pavement into a burning mirror. Heat waves rising in thick layers that blurred the horizon. In this seemingly peaceful setting, the air had thickened with rising tension. Maya stood tall, her breathing steady, eyes locked on Cole while he paced like a predator, sensing resistance beneath the surface. Cole's hand slid to his belt fingers, brushing the grip of his gun with the ease of habit. He drew it slowly, deliberately, the steel catching the sunlight in a blinding flash. The metallic sound of the weapon clearing its holster rang out sharp and dry, slicing into the silence and stretching the tension like a live wire. He raised the gun, its black barrel now just inches from her chest. The mouth of the gun gaped like a void collapsing space and pulling the world in around it. Cole gripped the weapon tight, finger resting lightly on the trigger, his voice rising with a laugh twisted in contempt. "You think that uniform's gonna stop a bullet out here? I'm the court." His words landed heavy, needing no evidence, no argument, only the barrel of a gun and the unchecked authority of a uniform. Every word snapped like a whip in the air, each syllable etched into Maya's mind like a raw, personal violation. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again, adjusting her breath to regain control. Slowly, she raised both hands to shoulder height, palms open, a move meant to protect herself and show she posed no threat. Her voice came steady and clear with no tremble, no defiance, only resolve. "I'm not a threat. I just want to move on." The words floated like a breeze through the heavy air, but they didn't calm Cole. Instead, they fueled his anger. To him, that calm wasn't reason, it was silent defiance. Briggs stood just behind, arms still folded. He pulled a cigarette from his pocket, placed it between two fingers, and lit it. The tiny flame flickered in the harsh sun, followed by a thin curl of smoke that wrapped around his expressionless face. He tilted his head, exhaled into the air, showing no surprise, no concern. The way he watched made it all feel rehearsed, as if this scene had played out 1,000 times and he was always front row. Briggs had no intention of stepping in, no reaction to a gun aimed squarely at the chest of an unarmed woman. His indifference made the moment all the more brutal, casual, practiced, and merciless. Maya felt every drop of sweat run down her spine, but her eyes stayed locked on the barrel of the gun. It wasn't the look of fear, but of someone who had stood face to face with death more than once and understood the value of being alive. Memories flashed through her mind, training sessions in freezing rain, trudging through chest-deep mud missions where one wrong step meant death. Those experiences were what kept her upright now, what held her ground even with cold steel inches from her chest. Cole saw that calm and burned hotter inside. He growled, voice dropping low, each word hitting like metal against stone. "Don't think silence makes you noble. Your silence just makes me want to pull the trigger faster." His finger tightened on the trigger veins bulging across his knuckles. Maya took a deep breath, her raised hand steady, her voice quiet but firm. "You'll be held accountable for every bullet." The words made Cole's eyes flash with cruelty, and he let out a short, dry laugh that echoed across the open field. The wind swept through again, flattening the dry grass, lifting dust that swirled around their feet. In the distance, a black crow dipped low, flapped hard, then shot upward, letting out a harsh croak like a warning. Briggs took a long drag from his cigarette, the smoke thick and white before it faded into the heat. To him, none of this was new. He had seen too many times when a gun spoke louder than words, too many times when pulling the trigger came as easily as breathing. Maya kept her voice level, refusing to retreat even half a step, knowing any small movement could trigger the shot. "You're not doing this to uphold the law. You're doing it to satisfy your ego," she said, her eyes sharp, unblinking. Cole curled his lip, the barrel still pressed close, and snapped back like a snarl. "I am the law, and out here, your life's in my hands." His words hissed through the wind, so laced with malice it seemed to darken the sky. Briggs stared off blankly, his eyes tired, but his smirk still in place like a spectator in a brutal game with a foregone ending. The air had thickened. Every heartbeat seemed to echo across the empty highway. The gun stayed aimed at Maya's chest. Cigarette smoke still drifted around Briggs, and Cole remained taut like a wire on the edge of snapping. That moment stretched on endlessly, each detail sharpened to the edge, the burnt smell of asphalt, the steady hum of cicadas, the glint of light off the metal. Maya stayed upright, eyes unblinking, hands raised in defense, a clear contrast to the violence pressing inches from her body. The standoff on that empty road had moved far beyond the bounds of a routine traffic stop. This was no longer about inspection or warning. It had become a display of power, where the gun served as control, where skin color stood as a sentence. Maya understood that, and she also knew that every move, every word she chose now would shape the course of everything that followed. And in that peak of tension, her calm was the only thing keeping her from being crushed beneath the weight of that cold, waiting barrel. The highway stretched on in silence, wind sweeping through the dry grass fields with a faint rustling sound, like a cold soundtrack to the violence about to unfold. The gun in Cole's hand remained fixed, the light from its steel barrel flashing under the sun, slicing through the heavy midday heat. Briggs stood nearby, exhaling smoke, his eyes glinting with mockery, as if waiting for the woman in front of him to break. Maya stood firm, hands still raised in defense, her gaze locked on Cole, dark eyes burning with steady fire. All that strained silence needed was a single pull of the trigger to shatter, and then the moment arrived. Cole's finger clenched and the gunshot cracked through the air, tearing apart the stillness. The sound rang across the fields, echoed, then vanished, leaving behind a terrible void. The bullet tore straight through Maya's shoulder, her body twisting before collapsing, blood spilling bright and fast across her shirt. The impact slammed her against the car door, the thud loud and heavy enough to make even Briggs flinch, despite his calm facade. Blood splattered onto the hot asphalt, sizzling faintly against the sun-baked surface. A scream burst from Maya's throat, not the scream of helplessness, but a final cry of resistance that seemed to slam into the chests of both men standing before her. "I wasn't resisting." Her voice cracked with pain, but every word came out sharp and clear, a statement of truth the officers were trying to erase. That voice rang out over the empty highway, drifting into the dry fields, even silencing the cicadas for a moment, leaving a chilling quiet in its wake. In that same moment, the military badge pinned to Maya's chest broke free from the force of the bullet and fell to the pavement. That small gleaming object rolled away, clinking across the road until it came to rest in the center of the burning asphalt. The sun hit it full on, making it shine like a shard of memory, a symbol of honor thrown down without mercy. The image struck hard. It revealed the truth. The person hit by that bullet wasn't some faceless civilian, but a U.S. military officer, a woman who had sworn to defend her country. Briggs, who had maintained a mask of indifference, suddenly froze. The cigarette slipped from his lips, its smoke curling upward and fading. His eyes fixed on the badge, glinting in the road pupils, widening like he'd just seen something impossible. His mouth-opened voice barely a whisper, so soft it seemed like he was talking to himself. "God, she's an officer." The words drifted into the wind, trembling a far cry from the cold sarcasm he had spoken with before. Cole still held the gun raised, but his face flickered with the change. The arrogance from moments before hadn't yet faded, but the truth in front of him struck like a slap to his blind pride. He saw the badge, heard Briggs speak, but in that moment he clung to aggression to drown out the reality. He sniffed a twisted smile creeping back, his voice dry. An officer, just another black face hiding behind a cheap uniform. The words came sharper, a bitter shield for the shock creeping into his eyes. Maya remained on her knees, clutching her bleeding shoulder. Red spread quickly, soaking her palm, but she kept her head raised, her gaze unshaken. There was no pleading in her eyes, only the undeniable truth. She had been shot without doing anything wrong, and that fact could not be erased. Pain seared through her back. Her breath came in bursts, but the discipline of a soldier kept her mind clear. The highway stood still, everything frozen. Only the wind rustled through the grass, the cicadas had gone silent, and hearts pounded in the chests of those present. The badge still lay on the road, its reflection catching the light like a spotlight, a silent but unrelenting accusation. Briggs stepped back, a wave of disgust rising within him, but he said nothing, unwilling to confront Cole. His silence, that cowardly stillness, only made the scene feel more suffocating. Maya leaned forward, blood dripping onto the pavement, leaving dark red marks on the blacktop. She clenched her teeth to keep from collapsing, each breath ragged like tearing cloth. Images flashed through her mind, fallen comrades, near escapes on foreign soil. All of it surged back now as strength anchor in her, so that even with a bullet through her shoulder, she still stared down the two men before her with the eyes of a warrior. The wind picked up again, carrying the leftover smoke and the thick scent of blood. In the distance, the highway shimmered in the heat, silent like a forced confession. Cole stepped half a pace back, still staring at Maya, making sure she had no strength left to resist. Briggs inhaled deeply, his hand clenching, then loosening his gaze, drifting, avoiding the spreading blood on Maya's shirt. In that moment, the truth was carved into the air itself. No matter how Cole denied it, no matter how silent Briggs remained, the gunshot, the scream, and the badge lying in the road had become evidence that could never be erased. The highway stayed quiet, but in that quiet, a deep fracture had opened, one that would spread and bring consequences no one could stop. The echo of the gunshot still lingered in the air, as if the scorching heat had trapped it before it could fade. On the asphalt, Maya knelt, clutching her blood-soaked shoulder, her breath, ragged eyes half closed in a haze of dizziness. Cole's shadow loomed over her, and the gun he had just fired was slid back into its holster with a casual motion as if he'd just finished a routine task. He stepped back, the hand still reeking of gunpowder slamming against the patrol car door. The loud thud rang across the empty highway, echoing like a final roar, a cold declaration that the power play had ended on his terms. Maya forced her head up, her voice dry and hoarse, every word stabbing through the burning pain. "I'm Colonel Maya Johnson, United States Army." Her eyes flashed for a moment, a look meant to remind the man who pulled the trigger that the person he had just humiliated was not nameless but a high-ranking officer, someone who had sworn to protect the country with her life. Cole froze for half a second, then gave a crooked, joyless smile. His laugh came brittle like splintered wood, snapping, bitter, and laced with contempt. "Colonel," he repeated, his tone heavy with mockery. He leaned down, staring at May, struggling to stay upright, and spat out each word with venom. "Out here, you're just another powerless black bitch." Every syllable cut like a blade, stripping the meaning from rank, from honor, until it was nothing under the gaze of a man drunk on his own authority. Briggs stood nearby, the last wisps of smoke from his cigarette blurring his vision in the wind. When he heard Maya's words, a flicker of hesitation crossed his eyes. The name Maya Johnson wasn't unfamiliar. He'd heard it in military briefings, even heard a teammate once call her a model of discipline and endurance. For a brief second, he meant to speak to stop his partner from falling deeper into disgrace. But then Cole's gaze shot toward him, sharp and cold as a blade, silencing whatever was rising in Briggs's throat. He swallowed hard, the sound dry and loud in his neck, and with it came the weight of cowardice pressing heavily on his shoulders. He turned his face away, arms still folded tight, but sweat now lined his temples. In that moment, the highway remained deserted, the sun-baked road seeming ready to swallow everything whole. Maya's head dropped, pain blurring her vision, but even through the daze she caught the sound of an engine approaching. A small car slowed, then stopped not far away. Its window rolled down, and from inside the faint glint of a phone camera flickered into view. The lens pointed silently toward the three figures, recording every act of cruelty, every insult, every drop of blood fallen onto the burning asphalt. Cole didn't notice it at first. He still stood there with the swagger of someone who believed the silence of the road was on his side. But Briggs saw it. His eyes flicked toward the car, and the glint off the phone's lens caught him someone was watching. He drew in a sharp breath, his hand trembling slightly before crossing his arms tighter, trying to hide it. But the truth had already been captured in images and undeniable evidence. Maya kept herself from collapsing completely. The pain in her shoulder spread down her arm, but the discipline of a soldier kept her upright. A flash of memory passed through her mind, grueling training sessions where even a moment of weakness meant failure. That memory helped her keep her eyes open, and she saw the flicker of light from the phone. It was a glimmer of hope, proof that the truth wouldn't be buried on this empty stretch of highway. Cole circled Maya, eyes narrowed, trying to burn the humiliation in deeper. He glanced down at the military badge still lying on the pavement, its reflection catching the light with each beat. He sniffed and kicked it hard with the toe of his boot, sending it skittering into the grass. The clang of metal against dirt rang sharp. "Colonel, that badge means nothing to me. It's just a rusty piece of scrap," he said, voice dripping with cruel mockery. Briggs turned his head but said nothing once again, letting the insult roll across the burning pavement unchecked. The sky above hung heavy white clouds scorched by the sun. The highway remained deserted, nothing but wind and dust. But the presence of that phone camera had turned the scene into testimony. Maya raised her head, lips pale, but eyes burning bright, staring directly at the person holding the phone. In that instant, It was as if she sent a silent message record. This, don't let the truth be buried. Cole slammed the patrol car door shut again, the metallic thud ringing out like a brutal gong. He turned away without a glance back, his movements casual like someone clearing away a nuisance. Briggs watched him go, throat tight, then followed, but in his mind the echo of Maya's voice lingered. I'm Colonel Maya Johnson, United States Army. That sentence left a crack in his cowardly silence, a crack that would never close. The highway sank back into stillness, only wind sweeping up dust, the faint crackle of asphalt under heat, and the image of a woman left bleeding eyes steady, watching the backs of those who believed they held the power of life and death. That scene, meant to disappear into the emptiness, had already been carved into a shaken lens held from afar. And from that moment on, the cruelty that unfolded here would no longer be a secret. It would become the spark that ignited a storm like nothing before. In the cramped room of a student dorm, the thick heat of a summer afternoon hung heavy, and the clattering ceiling fan above did little to push it back. On a cluttered desk, littered with notebooks and half-empty coffee cans, a group of students huddled around a glowing phone. The small screen cast a pale blue light, but what appeared on it made every pair of eyes widen, mouths agape in disbelief. The scene was unmistakable, the footage shaky in the hands of whoever filmed it. Cole, drawing his gun, the sharp crack of a shot. Maya's body jolting and collapsing, blood spreading across her shirt and her scream ringing out. I wasn't resisting. Then her military badge came loose, spinning across the blistering asphalt, catching the sun before stopping dead center in the lane. Inside the room, the initial silence froze every sound. One student covered her mouth, hand-trembling eyes glassy with tears, while another kept rewinding the video to make sure they'd seen it right. The spray of blood, the steadiness in Maya's eyes at the last second, and the strength in her voice sent all three hearts racing. One student slammed a fist on the desk, the sharp bang tipping over a coffee cup, liquid spilling across notes. Jesus, he shot her in the chest. She wasn't even doing anything, he said, voice cracking. No one said another word. Only heavy breathing and the ticking wall clock filled the space. But then, as if driven by instinct, the girl holding the phone typed quickly into the caption box. Her fingers moved fast, each word appearing police shoot, unarmed woman. She didn't overthink it, she just knew the rage had to be released somehow. The post button was hit, and the video left that tiny room hurling itself into the vast open space of the internet. At first, there were only a few views, but in minutes the number shot into the hundreds, then thousands. Notifications flooded the screen, alert sounds going off non-stop, overwhelming the group. The first comment popped up. What the hell is this? They shot a woman in the middle of the road, then another. I heard her. She said, I wasn't resisting. Each comment slammed like a hammer against the wall of silence, breaking the distance between a deserted highway and the outside world. Another student opened a laptop and pulled up the video on social media. The larger screen made everything clearer, more brutal. The gunshot echoed through the quiet dorm room, so sharp that a few people passing in the hallway stopped, turned, and stared in silence at the screen. Within minutes, the video had been shared thousands of times. A popular account posted, they just shot a U.S. Army colonel. The words lit up the feed like another explosion, and everyone in the room held their breath. They looked at one another, faces tense, knowing the truth had just broken free from these four tight walls. In a small cafe across the city, a group of young people stumbled across the video too. One turned up the volume, and the whole table fell silent, eyes locked on the screen. The image of Cole raising the gun, Maya collapsing, blood spreading, and the scream echoing. All of it felt too real, too cruel. A girl jumped to her feet, hands trembling. No way. She's a colonel, isn't she? The guy next to her, jaw clenched, answered. If they'll shoot a colonel, what do our lives even mean? The words hung in the cramped air as other phones lit up around the cafe, all playing the same video, all showing the same caption. Social media erupted. Beneath every post, thousands of comments flooded in, most of them burning with outrage. Maya Johnson served this country, and this is how they treat her. cops or executioners. Where's justice? Some users clipped the scene of her badge fallen, enlarged it into a full-screen image, and added bold red text, "Who protects those who protected us?" The image spread like wildfire, becoming the face of a movement that was only just beginning. Back in the dorm, the once quiet room was now packed, students crowding in to watch. No one raised their voice, but the whispers alone created a storm. She didn't do anything wrong. He shot like human life meant nothing. Each sentence was recorded, posted, and shared again, feeding the blaze already spreading fast. The hashtag Justice for Maya appeared in the first few captions, then quickly became a collective outcry. It showed up under every post, every comment, tied to every expression of anger and demand for justice. White letters on black backgrounds, digital posters framing Maya's face with steady eyes, and a red streak of blood filled every screen. The hashtag was no longer just a phrase. It was a declaration, a promise that this truth would not be buried. Across the city, from cafes and small offices to crowded subway trains, people stared at their phones, all watching the same image. Each view was a spark, each share a gust of wind feeding the flames. Individual voices joined into a collective roar. The heavy air of injustice had been exposed, and the storm called Justice for Maya had officially taken shape. From a small dorm room, the video of Cole firing his weapon and Maya collapsing had broken free, spreading into every corner. It passed through the walls of silence, crossed vast distances, and became a wave of rising outrage. And in every caption, every post, one question kept appearing: who will stand for justice for Maya? That question no longer belonged to the police alone. It now belonged to an entire society, forced to confront the twisted face of its own justice. The city's central square, usually bustling on sunny afternoons with tourists taking photos and children running around the fountain, felt completely different today. The usual noise had been replaced by a heavy undertone. On the giant LED screen mounted on the opposite building, the video of Cole shooting Maya played on a loop. The shaky footage was clear enough to show the moment the bullet pierced her shoulder, blood blooming across her shirt, her scream echoing, "I wasn't resisting," and her military badge spinning across the asphalt. The crowd was silent at first, but within seconds, whispers turned into shouting, and then into a rising wave of fury. The first person to raise a sign was a young man holding a board with bold red letters, "Stop Police Brutality." The words were sharp, tilted raw with anger. More signs followed in all colors, but with a unified message: justice for Maya, no one is above the law. People surged in from every street leading into the square, forming a dense mass, all eyes fixed on the screen looping that now infamous clip. The crowd's voice rose like a tide, expanding beyond the plaza's borders. Among them, an older man in a faded shirt stepped slowly onto the steps. He was a veteran, thin but firm eyes, steady movements, sure. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse but strong, cutting through the noise. She once protected this country. Who protects her now? The question struck deep into everyone's mind. For a heartbeat, the crowd went silent, then erupted with a chorus of voices. One by one, in groups, they repeated the question, turning it into a demand aimed at the sky and at the silent government buildings watching from above. The chanting grew louder, overtaking even the sirens wailing in the distance. City police had deployed to control the crowd alarms blaring and warning, but none of it could compete with the roar. Justice for Maya. Stop police brutality. Each chant landed like a drumbeat, rising with the stomping feet of thousands. The square shook under the weight of unified voices, no longer individuals, but a single unstoppable wave. Hastily printed posters moved through the crowd. The most striking image was Maya's military badge, stained bright red, lying abandoned on the asphalt. The photo was enlarged, bordered in dark black with bold white letters beneath it: "Who protects those who protect us?" The posters, passed from group to group, held high for all to see. In that moment, the badge, once just a small object, became a symbol carrying the weight of an entire movement. It was no longer cold metal, it was proof, it was a flag of outrage, a rallying point for every voice coming together as one. Every face in the crowd showed anger. Young students with red, tear-filled eyes, mothers carrying children while crying office workers in dress shirts who had left their desks to join in. Everyone raised their arms and shouted in eerie unison. A 15-year-old boy held up his phone, live streaming the entire plaza, his voice shaky but clear. "Look at this. We won't stay silent anymore." Within minutes, the stream had tens of thousands of viewers, the screen filling with furious comments and reaction emojis. At the edge of the square, a line of veterans stood shoulder to shoulder, hands over their hearts, eyes fixed on the LED screen. They had once served in uniform, once carried pride on their backs, and now seeing a fellow soldier humiliated, they could not stay still. One of them began to cry, tears sliding down a face marked by time. But even so, he raised his voice with the crowd. That image was captured by a photojournalist and spread instantly, a surge of emotion that added more force to the movement. The noise in the square had become a thunderous symphony. Chants, hand drums, stomping feet all blended into one sound that drowned out the sirens. The security forces lined up, their faces tense, but even they didn't dare move aggressively because they were no longer facing a few dozen protesters, but thousands of citizens demanding justice. News cameras shoved forward for better angles, reporters speaking nonstop into microphones, broadcasting the sight of a rising tide spinning beyond control. In that sea of people, the name Maya Johnson was heard again and again. No longer spoken as one person's name, it had become a symbol. Bold slogans, quick sketches painted across white fabric, all pointed to one message: justice must come and truth cannot be buried. All eyes looked up at the LED screen, where the image of Maya collapsing after the gunshot kept playing, and with every replay the rage grew deeper. No one left. Everyone stayed, as if to say they would not move until that one question had an answer. Who protects her? The wave in the streets could no longer be called a single protest. It had become the roar of an entire community. In that moment, the square was no longer a marketplace, but a gathering point for thousands of hearts beating as one. And within that human storm, the image of the blood-stained military badge held high on posters etched itself into everyone's memory, leaving a mark that would not fade. It was not only evidence of a crime, but a new vow that her sacrifice would not be in vain. While the square outside still roared like a storm, each chant pounding in the chests of those standing along the security barricade inside the district police headquarters, the atmosphere was the exact opposite. Thick concrete walls and soundproof glass almost completely erased the noise from outside. Yet, even in that silence, a faint trembling could still be felt, as if the building itself was quivering under the weight of the anger beyond. In the wide command office, fluorescent lights cast a sterile glow across polished wooden desks, stacks of untouched case files piled high. The silence wasn't peace. It was dense, oppressive, making each breath feel loud. Cole sat in the center of the room, his swivel chair leaned back, posture relaxed, as if none of it concerned him. An arrogant smile clung to his lips, feet resting on the desk heels, tapping steadily against the wood. He had just received a paid administrative leave, a phrase that sounded like punishment, but in truth served as a shield. To Cole, it meant protection, a message that the system still stood behind him. He waved toward the glass voice thick with contempt, each word bouncing off the walls. "Those people out there can't touch me." He laughed loud, sharp, a sound that sliced through the silence and left an uneasy echo in the room. Briggs stood in a corner, his shadow stretched long across the wall, face pale and tight. His eyes didn't move from the space ahead, but in his mind the image of Maya collapsing played over again, so vivid it made him shudder. He heard the shot, heard her strangled cry, saw the blood bloom across her shirt. His hand trembled and he shoved it into his pocket to hide the shake. Briggs wasn't built for heroism. He had grown used to silence and complicity, but that memory cracked something inside him and the fracture was spreading. He tried to stay calm, but his gut twisted, sweat trailing down his back, sticking his shirt to his skin. In another corner of the room, a young officer leaned against the wall, eyes full of uncertainty. His voice dropped barely above a whisper, but in the dead silence it rang out like metal striking steel. He shot a colonel. So what now? Heads lifted, a few eyes flickering with guilt before quickly lowering again. No one answered. No one wanted to hear that question repeated. They turned back to their files, flipping pages without purpose, as if the printed words could bury the truth that had just surfaced. Silence followed silence, an invisible wall rising higher with each second, and everyone knew it was built to protect the man at the center, the one who had just laughed in the face of his own gunshot. Fractures had begun to form inside the station. Some older officers sat staring down, avoiding each other's eyes, weighed down by guilt, but unwilling to speak. They knew this case was different this time. The victim wasn't just an anonymous civilian, but a high-ranking military officer. Some believed silence was the only way to keep their position to avoid being dragged into the spiral. Others feared that speaking out meant betraying the force. But among the younger officers, a sense of outrage stirred, unable to accept such blatant protection. They wanted to speak to break the wall of silence, but the fear of isolation, of retaliation, choked the words before they reached their lips. Cole raised his eyebrows, eyes scanning the room with triumph. He knew his colleague's mindset well. He knew silence was his greatest ally. There's nothing to worry about. All those people out there, they'll shout for a while, then quiet down. Our job is to stay silent, and I'm protect, he said evenly, emphasizing the word protected. In his mind, the noise outside was temporary, just background to the real power that resided in closed rooms where the law bent to serve the strong. An officer near the door clenched his fist so tight his knuckles turned white. He said nothing, but inside, fury swelled. The image of Maya collapsing, her desperate cry, her badge rolling into the street, all of it haunted him like a fresh scar. He wanted to scream at Cole that he wasn't the law, that he was just a murderer with a badge, but his lips stayed shut, throat locked. He knew that speaking out would end his career instantly, and so he stayed quiet, letting the darkness spread unchecked. On the surface, the station still functioned. People walked the halls with files, phones rang, and documents were stamped. But beneath that routine, the silence had grown more suffocating than any scream. It was like a room filled with smoke that no one dared to air out. Everyone covered their faces, trying to breathe, but the smoke only thickened. And in the center of it all, Cole sat, his arrogant smile unchanged. The contrast between inside and outside had become a blinding portrait. Outside, the square, surged voices shook the city, the blood-stained badge held high on posters, thousands shouting for justice for Maya. Inside, Cole smirked. Briggs trembled with memory. The young officer whispered an unanswered question, and others hid behind stacks of meaningless files. The cracks within the station widened, but everyone tried to patch them with silence. That silence, once believed to protect the system, now exposed its rot like a wall splintered and waiting for the one tremor strong enough to bring it all crashing down. And, deep down, everyone present knew the tremor was drawing near, growing with each passing minute, built by the wave outside rising stronger and louder. They knew this silence could not last forever. In a cramped, rented room, the yellow light from a hanging bulb cast shadows across the stained tile floor as a young man sat in front of his phone live stream mode on. His breathing was short, the hand holding the device trembled slightly, and his eyes were bloodshot after a day haunted by what he had witnessed. He was the one who filmed the video on the highway, the one who ensured the truth wouldn't be buried in silence. As the lens focused on his face, he swallowed hard, summoned all his courage, and spoke, voice hoarse but clear. "I saw it." She didn't resist. That sentence echoed across the internet, reaching millions of ears. In that instant, the wave of outrage surged higher. Angry reaction emojis flooded the screen, and comments poured in like a torrent. "We saw the blood, and now the witness confirms it. There's no excuse left." The young man's face quivered as he watched the view count skyrocket from tens of thousands to millions within minutes. But his eyes gradually brightened because he knew he wasn't alone. Behind him stood an entire movement waiting to erupt. The humble room had become the nation's focal point. Every breath, every glance of his was watched by millions. He spoke in detail, slowly but firmly, recounting how Maya stood still, hands raised, composed, and then was shot down right in front of him. His words needed no embellishment. It was their honesty that fueled the growing outrage. Below the stream, countless viewers commented, "She was a colonel. How could they treat her like that? Where is justice?" The lines stacked one after another, flooding the screen. The witness's initial fear gave way to resolve. He looked directly into the lens, clenched the hand resting on his knee, and continued, "I know it's dangerous to speak, but I can't stay silent. If I stay silent, her blood will be forgotten." It was no longer just a statement, it was a vow. A vow that left viewers silent for a moment before flooding the stream with heart and anger reactions. The numbers soared. His live stream became the top trending topic across platforms, and the name Maya Johnson was repeated again and again without pause. The voice of a witness from a small rented room had broken through every wall, reaching the outside world. Out on the streets amid crowds of protesters, phones lit up in unison, all tuning in, all listening, all chanting Maya's name. From that moment, the truth was no longer just a silent video. It had a voice, a witness, and millions of hearts standing behind it. The justice movement had officially entered a new chapter, stronger, fiercer, and unstoppable. Among the countless lines of text scrolling across the live stream screen, one comment suddenly stood out, pinned in place as a number of likes skyrocketed within seconds. "If justice is silent, we won't be." That short, decisive sentence rang out like a collective vow, immediately echoed by thousands, then shared by tens of thousands more. It became a slogan, a declaration for all those who were outraged but hadn't yet found the words. The witness sitting in the rented room glanced up, saw the comment pinned just below his image. His eyes paused, lips trembling slightly before pressing shut, because he understood the truth no longer rested in his hands alone. It had become the strength of an entire community. In small apartments, in cafes, on subway trains, and in crowded public squares, that sentence was repeated like a chorus. Some quickly printed it on white paper and held it up in front of cameras. Others used it as a caption for images of the blood-stained military badge, and many typed it in bold letters on social media walls to affirm that silence was no longer an option. Those words connected millions of strangers into a single body, turning one lone comment into a rallying cry. In just a few hours from that small rented room, the hashtag tied to that phrase had climbed into the nationwide trending list. Every phone screen was flooded with posts carrying in the same words like a silent banner stretched across the digital landscape. From regular users to celebrities, everyone repeated it, turning a single sentence into a spreading fire. Even major news outlets picked it up for their headlines, framing it as the emblem of a movement in full blaze. The power of social media has now surged like a wave breaking every boundary. Angry reaction emojis flooded in along with bold comments. "We will speak for Maya. Justice cannot be silenced." The hashtag was attached to every image, from posters of Maya's face to clips replaying the gunshot. It was no longer just a marker, but a flag gathering millions of hearts focused on one cause. In the rented room, the witness still sat watching the numbers climb on the screen from millions to record-breaking heights he had never imagined. He knew danger was drawing closer, but seeing the phrase, "If justice is silent, we won't be," repeated everywhere, brought him calm. He was no longer alone, and the truth no longer felt fragile. It was now held, protected, and amplified by millions. And from that moment on, the movement for justice for Maya entered a new phase, one where silence no longer had a place to exist. Inside the FBI headquarters in the Capitol, early morning light filtered through thick glass, casting a solemn tone over the high-floor conference room. The atmosphere was starkly different from the noise erupting across social media here. Every breath was slow but heavy, as everyone understood that each decision made would shape how the nation viewed the case that had shaken it. On the long wooden table, a large screen replayed the now viral video, Cole firing the shot, Maya collapsing, blood spreading across her uniform. The forensic analysts sat silently, eyes fixed on each frame, fingers tightening around their pencils, the soft tapping against the cold tabletop echoing faintly. The FBI director, a man well accustomed to high-profile cases, couldn't hide the tension this time. He slammed the file onto the table, his voice firm and cutting, open an emergency case file. From this moment, the Maya Johnson incident falls under federal jurisdiction. The brief statement was enough to shift the entire landscape. Several aides scribbled notes rapidly, pens darting across their notepads, while the communications officer exited immediately to draft a press release. Urgency spread quickly, and the once quiet room buzzed with hurried footsteps and the rustle of flipping documents. Across the table, a national security advisor adjusted his glasses, his voice calm but precise. The victim is Colonel Johnson. This is no longer a routine case. That statement thickened the already dense atmosphere. Glances were exchanged, worried, resolute, because when a senior military officer is shot on American soil, especially under public humiliation, the consequences extend far beyond a single event. It jeopardizes interagency relations, the military's trust in law enforcement, and most critically, the stability of the nation. Legal experts opened laptops reviewing sentencing guidelines while seasoned investigators began preparing their interview strategy. Their conversations were low, barely above whispers, but the tension made each word strike hard against the still air. One mentioned media pressure, another added that the White House had requested hourly updates. Every eye returned to the screen where Maya's face appeared, her eyes still ablaze, even in the moment her shirt was stained with blood. That image served as a silent summons, pushing the entire room toward quicker, firmer action. In a corner, a few younger agents exchanged glances. They had just scrolled through the wave of online comments moments before entering the meeting and now understood they stood at the center of a historic public reckoning. There was no room for hesitation. Millions of citizens were watching their every move. A mix of pride and pressure settled over them, but each one clenched their fists, ready to step into the legal battle ahead, determined to bring the truth to light. The moment the director signaled the emergency meeting was over, the sound of chairs scraping echoed through the room as everyone quickly dispersed to carry out their assignments. The conference room door closed behind them, but the weight of the words just spoken still lingered in the air. This was no longer a standard case of police violence, but a test of the entire federal justice system. And while darkness still blanketed the streets outside, filled with signs and protests inside the FBI headquarters, the wheels of investigation had begun to turn, promising to bring the truth into the light. While departments at the FBI rushed to gather data, reports were sent directly to the White House. Inside the Situation Room, large screens simultaneously displayed breaking news headlines alongside the viral video now seen across the country. Security advisors, military generals, and legal teams were all present, their eyes fixed on the footage of Maya collapsing on the highway. The president demanded hourly updates, emphasizing that this incident wasn't just about one individual, but could fracture public trust nationwide. Urgent calls were made to the Department of Justice, the Department of Defense, and the National Security Council, all revolving around a single pressing question: how do you prosecute a police officer who shot a military colonel without shaking the system itself? Outside the White House, the press swarmed, cameras and microphones raised high, all waiting for an official statement. Political pressure mounted by the hour as the public had run out of patience. They wanted intervention from the highest level to see justice not only discussed behind closed doors, but acted upon in real time. In the thick of that tension, news updates flashed across live broadcasts with the name Maya Johnson, scrolling repeatedly across the ticker, turning her into the epicenter of every national conversation. In stark contrast to the urgency of federal agencies inside the district police office, Cole remained slouched in his chair, oddly relaxed. He smirked as his colleagues stared at the wall-mounted television which was reporting the White House's direct involvement. With a sneer and hiss, he muttered arrogantly, "They won't dare touch the police." His words rang out sharp and defiant, tightening the already strained atmosphere. Several young officers furrowed their brows but said nothing. They knew Cole was clinging to a belief that had lingered too long, the invisible but enduring shield of protection. The reason so many cases like this had faded into silence. Inside them, guilt swelled. Outside, millions were chanting Maya's name. Yet here, the man who caused it all still wore a smirk. Briggs stood quietly in the corner, his fist tightening as Cole spoke, Maya's collapse flashing through his mind like a blow to the chest. But still, he stayed silent, weighed down by fear that choked the voice rising in his throat. Cole kept bouncing, his leg eyes scanning those around him as if to assert his untouchable status. Behind that confident smile, he believed that no matter if the White House was watching or the FBI had opened a case, everything would eventually be swept into the machinery of politics and fade away like the cases before. But what he didn't realize was that this time, the truth had already grown far beyond control. The live stream, the witness, the movement in the streets, everything was converging into a wave too powerful to stop, and his words, "They won't dare touch the police," had unwittingly thrown fuel onto a fire now spreading across the nation. Inside the sealed interrogation room, white light from the ceiling poured onto the metal table, making the air colder and more tense than ever. Cole leaned back in his chair, chin tilted up, eyes still carrying that familiar smugness. In front of him sat two federal investigators, their faces unreadable, every movement calculated and precise. Cole crossed his arms occasionally, tapping his fingers on the table like someone in control, then suddenly spoke with a dry voice. She resisted. "I warned her multiple times before firing." He deliberately emphasized each word, repeating resisted like it was a shield. In his mind, similar stories had saved fellow officers before, and he believed this time would be no different. One of the investigators remained silent, only nodding before pressing a button on a small remote placed on the table. Instantly, the large screen behind Cole lit up, playing the video recorded by the witness's phone in crystal clarity. The gunshot echoed through the room, showing Maya with her hands raised, not resisting her expression, calm, her voice clear. "I'm not threatening you, I just want to move on," followed by the moment blood spread across her shirt. Every frame was sharp, undeniable. The sound made the room tremble, and even Cole, trying to stay unfazed, visibly flinched hearing her scream, "I'm not resisting." The small room fell completely silent except for the video continuing to play. Maya's military badge spun on the asphalt, stopping in the sunlight, followed by Briggs whispering, "God, she's an officer." That moment made the other investigator look up, his cold gaze piercing into Cole. "You said she resisted." He didn't need to shout or pound the table, but his even tone carried the weight of the room. Cole squinted, pressed his lips together, then forced a nervous laugh. He shook his head, trying to deflect. Videos can be edited. They can make anything look different. But the words rang hollow as the footage ran smoothly with no signs of tampering. The air grew heavier by the second. The investigators stayed silent, letting Cole hear his own lies unravel under the weight of evidence. Every second that passed made him more uneasy, veins popping as his hand thudded against the metal table. His eyes darted, searching for something to hold on to, but the cold, bare walls only reflected the image of a man slowly losing his confidence. He leaned back again, gave a dry laugh, but unease flickered in his eyes. The investigators didn't need to say much. They knew the evidence spoke loudly louder than any defense. The interrogation room door closed tightly, cold light spilling across Cole's face, revealing the contortion as his words no longer aligned with reality. Outside, the federal system had begun initiating the next procedures, and here, every word, every frame in the video had become a blade slicing through the shield he had tried to construct. Cole could keep his arrogance, but the truth had already been exposed, and there was no way to hide it now. The investigation had officially entered a phase where every false statement would only bring him closer to the sentence waiting ahead. Suddenly, Cole slammed both palms against the metal table, the sharp noise echoing through the room and making the walls tremble slightly. He shouted, voice full of rage, trying to push his fury outward to mask the unease inside. Social media is lying. The sound reverberated off the bare walls, doing nothing to lighten the oppressive air. He raised his voice again, insisting that everything spreading outside was only part of the story, that the video had been edited to smear his name, that the public was easily swayed by shocking images. He threw out every excuse, hoping his anger could erase the contradictions in his earlier statements, but each word only deepened the sense of desperation. In stark contrast to Cole's fury, the two investigators remained still, neither blinking nor nodding in agreement, nor offering any rebuttal. They chose silence as a counterattack, letting Cole hear the hollowness in his own reasoning. One of them leaned forward slightly, gaze locked on Cole. Cold, emotionless, and sharp enough to raise the hair on his neck. That silence was more terrifying than any accusation because it left Cole with nothing to cling to, no escape from the weight closing in. He started to hesitate, the tapping of his fingers weakening. His breathing grew quicker, his eyes darting around the small room where only the quiet surveillance camera hung in the corner. The shouting stopped. Cole realized his angry words were being swallowed by the silence. He sat back, propping his chin on one hand, eyes blazing, yet unable to hide the panic, then let out a heavy, frustrated sigh. The investigator's icy stare stayed fixed on him like a blade driven into his mind. No questions, no accusations, just that look, and it was enough to show him how the wall of silence was tightening, leaving him breathless. Outside, the public was surging in demand for justice, while in here, he was facing eyes that saw through every lie. The gap between his shouting and their silence was like the divide between someone clinging to rotted power and those steadfast in defending the truth. In that moment, Cole realized the battle was no longer in his hands. His rage couldn't crack the icy calm of the investigators, and every attempt to deny only made him look more desperate. The silence wasn't surrender, but an invisible verdict slowly tightening around his neck, signaling that the truth had moved beyond his control. That late-night bar was nearly empty, and the yellow light falling on chipped wooden tables made the space feel colder than warm. Briggs sat alone in a dark corner, a line of empty glass tumblers scattered in front of him, a few still streaked with pale amber traces dripping down the sides. He kept drinking, as if trying to erase the memories tormenting him, but the more he drank, the clearer they became. In his mind, Cole's gunshot echoed Maya's calm but pained eyes etched in like an unerasable carving, and her scream, "I am not resisting," kept repeating, pressing against his conscience. Each time the glass hit the table, the dry thud made Briggs shiver, sounding too much like the choking sob of a memory that refused to fade. An old friend, also a fellow officer, happened to walk in and recognized Briggs. He pulled out a chair and sat across from him, glanced at the clutter of bottles on the table, and frowned. Without giving Briggs a chance to hide behind silence, the friend asked bluntly, "What did you see?" The question wasn't loud, but it was enough to cut through any attempt at pretending indifference. Briggs froze the glass in his hand, halted mid-air, his eyes fixed on the foam residue inside the glass, as if it were the last place he could hide. For a few seconds he didn't respond, his breathing heavy, his shoulders tense, then finally sank, as if the moment to keep it in had passed. glass. Briggs set the glass down, eyes bloodshot, lips trembling, before finally pushing out the confession he dreaded hearing aloud. "I saw him shoot for no reason." The sentence was short, but it dropped like a stone, heavy and inescapable in the alcohol-thickened air. His friend stared wide-eyed, and the entire bar seemed to pause for a beat, the faint background music from an old speaker drifting farther away. Briggs brought a hand to his face, fingers trembling, his mind torn between the fear of being branded a traitor and the haunting memory of a woman's unjust death he had seen with his own eyes. He knew every word he had just spoken could turn into a blade pointed at his career, even his life, but the weight of truth left him no other choice. Another glass was poured, and Briggs lifted it, but his hand no longer held steady, the liquid sloshing onto the table. His friend across the table said nothing more, only stared at him, eyes lit with a mixture of shock and encouragement, as if silently urging Briggs to keep moving beyond the shadow of silence. In that moment, Briggs realized alcohol couldn't erase anything. It only laid bare the truth he was trying so hard to hide. The atmosphere in the bar was unusually quiet, with a few scattered patrons who paid no attention, but to Briggs, every tick of the clock on the wall felt like a reminder that time no longer belonged to him. He buried his face in both hands, took a deep breath, then softly repeated, this time in a deeper and clearer voice, "I saw everything, and I can't forget." That confession dropped onto the cold tiled floor, leaving a lingering echo in both their minds, signaling that the wall of silence had begun to crack, and once the truth had been spoken, it would not be easily buried again. Briggs sat in silence for a long time after uttering the words he hadn't expected himself to say. His voice was hoarse from alcohol and guilt, but every word rang clearly through the still air. "I saw him shoot for no reason." That sound shattered the wall of silence he had tried to build for days, and once released, it could not be taken back. The friend across from him said nothing, only looked at him with a heavy gaze, then quietly placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of encouragement that needed no words. Briggs leaned forward, his gaunt face reflected in the mirror on the wall, eyes bloodshot as if scorched by the very memory. News of the confession began to leak in ways he hadn't anticipated. A nearby patron had secretly recorded the brief exchange with a phone hidden beneath the table. At first, it circulated in private groups with just a few dozen shares, but soon the phrase "Briggs admits Cole fired without cause" spread like wildfire. Online communities erupted, splicing the audio clip with images of Briggs in uniform, creating a vivid piece of evidence that the truth could no longer be silenced. Within hours, hundreds of major accounts began sharing it, calling the confession a turning point in the entire investigation. Comments poured in, one reading, "He said it. There's no excuse left." Another added, "A witness from within the police. What more does justice need?" The words came in waves, sweeping over Briggs, transforming him from a silent accomplice into an essential piece of the truth. At FBI headquarters, investigators immediately requested the audio, and when they heard Briggs's raspy but unmistakable voice, everyone understood that the gap between testimony and evidence had narrowed significantly. An emergency meeting was called to discuss how to secure further statements from him. Back in the bar, Briggs remained unaware, still slumped over a freshly poured glass, feeling as though all strength had been drained from his body. He had yet to realize that the moment he spoke those words, he had become the new focal point of public attention, with every eye now fixed on him. That evening, television news broadcasts delivered the update in a brief but striking headline. "An officer present at the scene has admitted that Cole fired without cause." The accompanying footage showed the moment Maya collapsed, overlaid with a scrolling caption quoting Briggs's statement. Viewers sat frozen for a few seconds, then erupted in a renewed wave of outrage, sharing the clip with comments like, "This is the truth from the inside." That confession had broken free from the walls of a bar and struck directly at the silence Cole once believed to be untouchable. Briggs sat in the dark corner, still unaware that every word he had spoken had already left that room, echoing across across millions of devices inside conversations and throughout high-level meetings. The torment hadn't lessened, but on some level, for the first time he felt a small release in his chest, a slight easing of the weight because the truth was out and there was no way to call it back. The courtroom that morning was packed. The long benches reserved for the public left not a single seat empty, and the hallway was crammed with people, standing shoulder to shoulder. The air was thick with tension, every gaze fixed on the main entrance, where the victim of the incident was about to enter. Maya appeared with her arm bandaged, a strip of white wrapped across her shoulder standing out against a plain suit, and every step she took left a powerful impression. The crowd rose no command needed. All eyes followed her, the silence broken only by the sound of her shoes tapping against the marble floor. That image felt like the return of a soldier shot down but rising again, proud and unbroken. Maya stepped up to the witness stand, the lights casting down on a face still pale, but with eyes bright and focused. She placed her hand near the microphone, nodded briefly to the court, then lifted her chin and spoke with clarity. Her voice was not loud, nor did it need to be, but every word dropped with weight that quieted the entire courtroom. "I swore to protect this country, but who protects me from the police?" The question echoed heavy, drawing a collective breath from the room. From the gallery, a few whispers rose, then quickly fell silent as everyone felt the gravity of her words. It was not just testimony, it was an indictment aimed directly at the very system meant to protect its citizens. A long pause followed until journalists began typing furiously, keys clacking in rapid bursts. Cameras panned slowly, capturing every movement, every expression on Maya's face. Those seated in the front rows, from veterans to lawyers to everyday citizens, bowed their heads as if to fully absorb the question. No one dared look at Cole, seated at the defendant's table, because the contrast was too stark on one side, the calm of a woman who had once vowed to sacrifice for her nation on the other, the tightened face of a man whose bloodshot eyes betrayed the fear of being exposed. Maya continued her tone, steady and firm, recounting in detail that afternoon on the highway, how she raised her hands to show she posed no threat, how the sudden gunshot tore through her shoulder, and the moment her military badge rolled across the asphalt. Each sentence, each detail unfolded like an indelible memory, weighing heavily on the courtroom. Some covered their eyes, others shook their heads, but everyone listened because the story was no longer just a viral video. It was the truth being told by the victim herself inside the court of law. The atmosphere in the courtroom at that moment was no longer just about a trial. It had become a place for society to confront a larger question when a soldier returns from the battlefield who protects them from those who abuse power in their own homeland. Maya's voice closed her testimony with a steady gaze at the jury, her eyes firm yet filled with pain, as if to remind them that the verdict was not just for one man, but a statement for an entire system. A technician stepped forward, setting up a large screen in the center of the courtroom. A flash of blue light flickered, and all eyes turned toward it. As the video played, the sharp crack of gunfire made several people flinch, and the image of Maya, with her hands raised in a clear, non-threatening posture before collapsing blood spreading across her shirt, silenced the room before it erupted. Many covered their mouths, some sobbed aloud, and others exhaled in outrage. When the cry, "I'm not resisting," echoed through the courtroom speakers, each word cut deep into the conscience of everyone present until a loud gasp burst from the gallery, rolling forward like a wave spreading across the room. Reporters rushed to capture every second. Cameras zoomed in on the jury's faces, where stiff eyes revealed their shock. Some courtroom members exchanged looks, their faces pale, because undeniable evidence had just played before them. Cole, seated at the defendant's table, briefly lowered his head, his hands gripping the chair, the confident smile gone without a trace. Meanwhile, Maya sat upright, eyes unblinking, watching the screen as if to prove one final time that the truth she spoke now had clear evidence. No excuses remained, as the truth had spoken through vivid sound and image. Outside the courthouse, the mood was even more intense. Thousands gathered in the square eyes fixed on giant screens set up to stream the trial live. When the footage showed Maya collapsing, the crowd roared their chants, overpowering even the outer police sirens. Each cry of justice for Maya echoed loud and fast, building into an endless human wave. Signs were raised, high posters with blood-stained military insignias swayed in the sunlight, forming a scene that was both sorrowful and unbreakably strong. Many people live-streamed on the spot. Millions across the country watched on their phone screens, all typing the same words in unison, flooding every forum, every platform. The sea of people outside merged with the millions watching from afar, creating a unified resonance. The chants from the square echoed into the courtroom, adding to an already heavy atmosphere. Each shout of justice for Maya rang like a bell of urgency, a reminder that the court's verdict was not just a legal procedure, but an answer to an entire nation waiting. In that moment, there were no boundaries between inside and outside the court, between those attending in person and those watching through a screen. Everyone moved in the same rhythm, spoke the same words to protect an undeniable truth. After the video ended, the courtroom still hadn't regained its composure. Noise mixing with tears, with whispers of outrage. Outside, the crowd kept screaming, raising banners high. And the name Maya Johnson became a symbol, a resounding call connecting millions who shared the same longing for justice. Inside the closed courtroom, the atmosphere felt compressed under the weight of mountain evidence. Cole's attorney stepped up to the stand, his confident posture barely masking his unease, his calm voice hiding signs of strain. He began with minor arguments, trying to twist details from the incident report, pointing out gaps in the documentation to plant seeds of doubt in the jury's mind. He spoke of the video's limited angle of uncertainty in the victim's response, then emphasized that officers have the right to defend themselves when they feel threatened. These arguments echoed hollow in the still room, repeated again and again, but they could not erase the stark image already burned into everyone's mind. When the defense rested, the prosecutor stepped forward, placing a thick folder and an open laptop on the table. The witness was called the young man who had filmed the incident. He stood tall, his voice firm, recounting each detail he had seen with his own eyes. She stood still, raised her hands, and I clearly heard her say, "I'm not resisting," before the shot was fired. The statement was simple, unembellished, but that simplicity gave it weight. The courtroom fell silent, broken only by the clack of reporters typing every word. Immediately after Briggs's confession was presented, the audio playing his hoarse voice, "I saw him shoot without cause." The short sentence cut off any path of retreat for Cole. His face paled, his knuckles turned white from the pressure of his grip. His eyes scanned the room for any lifeline, but all turned away. He leaned back in his chair, his stare empty, while the prosecutor calmly continued. This came from the defendant's own colleague, not public opinion, not exaggeration. This is the truth. When the video was played again in the closed courtroom, the gunshot cracked. Maya collapsed, and the frame showing Briggs's shocked whisper, "She's an officer," froze in place. No one had patience left for excuses, as the trail of evidence had built a complete picture exposing Cole's guilt in full. His lawyer sat down, face drawn, knowing every attempt to twist technicalities had dissolved into nothing. In that moment, Cole could no longer hold on to his usual arrogance. He clenched his jaw, ready to shout that it was all a plot to bring him down, but his voice caught, stripped of weight. Cold stares pierced him from the jury, from the prosecutor, from former colleagues. No one believed his excuses anymore. Cole's downfall didn't come with a loud crash, but in the cold silence of the closed courtroom where every piece of evidence had pinned him to the defendant's chair with no way out. Cole suddenly jumped from his seat, the cuffs on his wrists clanging against the metal table, his eyes bloodshot, his voice breaking into a scream. "They're trying to take down white cops." The heavy words echoed through the courtroom, startling some, but the tension quickly turned into disdain. Jury members exchanged glances, a few faces showing clear discomfort because they recognized his outburst not as truth, but as a desperate attempt attempt to paint himself as a victim. His words, full of bitterness and hate, moved no one. Every gaze in the room only grew colder, watching him like a man who had thrown himself into the abyss. The judge, who had remained silent throughout the proceedings, slowly brought down the gavel. The room fell utterly still, all eyes turning toward the bench. He stood tall, face stern, eyes deep and unwavering, carrying the resolve of one entrusted with final judgment. His voice rang out clear, not loud, but deliberate, cutting through Cole's madness with precision. "No, this is justice." The words sliced through the illusion Cole had tried to wrap around himself. They hung in the air, heavy, cooling the room by several degrees, sending a tight chill down every spine. Cole froze, his trembling hand resting on the table, lips twitching but unable to form another word. His earlier screams were swallowed by the judge's statement, leaving behind a suffocating silence. His face twisted, no longer defiant but overcome by visible fear. The jury gave subtle nods, and some of the citizens seated at the back placed their hands over their hearts as if they had finally heard what they'd been waiting for. The contrast in that moment was stark. On one side, the fury of a man unraveling; on the other, the calm finality of justice. Justice was no longer an abstract idea but a firm declaration from the judge, a man fully aware that the nation was watching every move. The words, "This is justice," echoed beyond the courtroom walls, folding into the chants still rising in the square outside. In that room, the truth was finally called by its name, and with the judge's sentence, Cole lost all ground for any further defense. That morning, the local Supreme Court was filled. Every seat in the gallery was taken, hallways packed with reporters and citizens eager to witness the conclusion of the case that had shaken the entire nation. From the high bench, the judge wore a stern expression, his gavel striking 3 times, the sound echoing through the wide chamber, marking the moment of reckoning. Cole stood at the defendant's post, hands cuffed in front of him, his face hollow and pale. All former arrogance had vanished, replaced by exhaustion and a vacant stare. The judge read the sentence, voice low and steady, each word dropping like the clang of iron. Defendant Cole is sentenced to long-term imprisonment for unlawful use of a firearm, causing severe bodily harm and abuse of power. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Some clapped, others wept, while Cole lowered his head, shoulders trembling as if he had finally grasped the full extent of his collapse. Briggs was summoned to stand immediately after. The judge looked directly at him, then read the ruling. Briggs is granted immunity due to cooperation in the investigation, providing key testimony that helped uncover the truth. The words made him exhale with relief, his hands loosening after many sleepless nights. But no applause followed, nor was there any show of approval. In the cramped courtroom, all eyes turned toward Briggs were cold, some even filled with contempt. People hadn't forgotten his silence the moment Maya was shot, hadn't forgotten the faint smirk while standing behind Cole, and hadn't forgotten that only under overwhelming public pressure did he finally speak. Immunity on paper couldn't erase the stain in the public's mind, and Briggs knew it. He stepped down from the stand, walking past the rows of observers, each stare like a needle pricking at his skin. Some turned away, some shook their heads, and a few whispered in scorn. Briggs kept his head down every step, heavy, knowing that the road ahead held no place for trust. He had escaped legal punishment, but was now trapped in the invisible sentence handed down by society, Sitayuan, with no end date. Meanwhile, the applause grew louder, echoing through the courtroom as Cole's sentence was formally concluded. Many embraced in tears, seeing it as a victory for justice. Maya sat quietly in the crowd, her eyes fixed on the judge, a mix of emotions rising within. The sentence couldn't erase the pain, couldn't return what had been lost, but at least it proved that truth could not be buried forever. In that moment, justice had been named, even if belatedly, and society understood that this was a pivotal shift in how power and accountability would be viewed within law enforcement. Maya sat among the rows of seats in the courtroom, hands resting neatly on her lap, her face calm. The wound had not fully healed, and she still had to keep her bandaged arms supported, but her eyes shone with a conviction that anyone who looked could feel. Throughout the trial, she didn't need to shout or argue, "Fires, she silly." She only quietly followed each development. When the final verdict was announced, she didn't cry, nor did she smile, but let her gaze serve as the strongest affirmation that her resolve and faith in justice had not been betrayed. Her silence was not weakness, but a moment of inner strength rising like a warrior who had endured pain to hold firm to her ideals. Outside, the main street in front of the courthouse erupted. Thousands who had waited for days crowded in the cold and chanting non-stop now broke into cheers. The sea of people surged, flags and banners waving in the sunlight, applause merging with chants of justice for Maya echoing without pause. Some hugged the person beside them, some sobbed into their friends' arms, and veterans raised their badges high in remembrance and solidarity with Maya. Together they formed a resonance louder than any siren, proof that her resilience had become a shared force. The media quickly broadcast images from inside and outside the courtroom. Cameras captured the moment. Maya sat silently, her eyes burning bright, then shifted to the cheering crowd outside, creating a moving contrast. News channels ran bold headlines emphasizing that justice had spoken. Photos of Maya with her determined gaze spread everywhere, shared alongside the chants of the crowd, becoming a new symbol of dignity and fairness. The cheering wasn't just a release, but carried the weight of a collective promise. The crowd understood that the case didn't end with Cole's sentence, but marked the beginning of a longer path to change. Hope was rekindled in the eyes of everyone, from young students to elderly veterans, from mothers carrying toddlers on their shoulders to everyday workers. All joined in the same chant, all looked to Maya as proof of the power of truth. In that moment, two images merged inside Maya's quiet stillness. Outside, a sea of voices. One was the strength of an individual, the other the power of the collective. And together they formed a complete portrait of justice's triumph, where pain had become belief, where one person had lit the flame of hope for thousands. On national television, a special live talk show aired, drawing millions of viewers across the country. The studio was brightly lit, every seat in the audience filled, all eyes fixed on the central figure. Maya appeared in simple attire, her hair tied neatly back, her face still bearing traces of the wound, but her eyes radiated an uncanny calm. The host opened with a brief introduction, emphasizing that today the audience would hear the story directly from the person who lived it, unfiltered through any lens. As the microphone was handed to her, Maya nodded slightly, her voice steady and warm, unshaken and free of dramatization. She recounted the afternoon on the highway, the moment flashing lights appeared in the rearview mirror, the shouting outside her window, and the sequence of events leading up to the fatal shot. Maya's account held nothing back, nor did it dodge any part of the truth. Each detail was simple yet vivid enough for the audience to clearly picture the suffocating tension she endured. She stressed that at the time she simply wanted to continue her journey, posed no threat, and did everything she could to remain calm and protect herself. Her even tone, never once raised, carried more power than any chant or slogan because it held raw truth and unyielding courage. The room was utterly silent, every eye locked on her, every movement watched. There were moments when one could hear the anxious breathing from the back rows. No one dared to interrupt, not even with a cough, because this story had transcended ordinary testimony. It was a confrontation with justice, an open wound shown live before millions. When Maya finished, her final words were a short but resonant declaration. "I believe in justice, and today I saw it." For a moment afterward, time seemed to freeze, silence blanketing the studio. Then, suddenly, one audience member rose and clapped loudly, breaking the stillness. A second followed, then a third, and soon the entire room was on its feet, applause pouring like a downpour. The sound swelled, merging with chants of Maya's name, forming a wave of energy so powerful it made her lower her head slightly, her eyes glistening with a faint shimmer. That moment did not stay confined to the studio. The image of Maya calmly telling her story and the entire audience rising in applause was broadcast live immediately, spreading across social media, becoming a new symbol of the strength of steadfastness. People from all walks of life shared it, adding words of encouragement, seeing it as proof that a clear, resolute voice could shake an entire system. And for Maya, this was the moment she ceased to be a solitary victim, becoming instead the torchbearer lighting the path of belief for millions. The host stepped to the center of the stage, his voice deep yet resonant, closing the broadcast with a short, powerful statement from "Victim, you have become a symbol." The entire studio erupted in applause once more, a long round of clapping filled with emotion and respect. Maya sat in the center seat, her eyes reflecting a quiet light as if she understood that the pain she endured no longer belonged to her alone, but had become a shared belief. The moment was captured from multiple camera angles, and as soon as the program ended, clips from the show appeared across countless online platforms shared at a speed too fast to count. Maya's story did not stop at the border. It spread far beyond the nation. International networks immediately rebroadcast it, and major newspapers placed it on front pages, framing it as proof of a rising movement against abuse of power. In Europe, newspapers printed Maya's photo alongside the host's words next to images of ongoing protests. In Asia, social media overflowed with translated clips of her retelling the events. In Africa, radio stations replayed her story as a lesson in resilience. And in Latin America, community groups held forums naming Maya as proof of the power of one voice raised. Reporters from around the world sought interviews not to dig into tragedy, but to highlight her inner strength. Footage of Maya, calmly speaking into the microphone with a standing ovation behind her, was viewed repeatedly across platforms, turning her into a global symbol of courage and justice. Hashtags in her name trended in multiple countries, from "Justice for Maya" to "Ishishi is the symbol," spreading rapidly as a wave of solidarity that crossed borders. Even international organizations issued statements praising her resilience and calling for sweeping reforms in law enforcement systems. On commentary shows, scholars analyzed how this event was not merely an isolated case, but a turning point in the global understanding of justice and human rights. Maya became the face of voices long suppressed, and her story was placed alongside key milestones in civil rights history. From a small studio in her home country, the story spread across the globe, where everywhere the host's words echoed. From "Victim, you have become a symbol." It was no longer just a closing remark, but a declaration that opened a new chapter where justice is recognized not only through laws, but through the unity of millions around the world. Maya had crossed the boundary from a woman who endured pain to a global symbol, a guiding light for the belief that justice never fades. At the Central Police Headquarters, camera lights flashed continuously as the special press conference began. The auditorium was packed with reporters, and in front of the podium stood rows of senior officials in formal suits. The atmosphere was tense, all eyes fixed on the spokesperson holding a thick press release. He took a deep breath and spoke firmly, announcing a series of new regulations issued in response to the recent shocking incident. At the top of the long list of reforms, the first point immediately had reporters scribbling notes: a mandatory rule requiring all officers to wear body cameras while on duty to ensure transparency and eliminate the gray areas that once allowed abuse of power to thrive. The spokesperson did not evade. He emphasized that this was a direct response to public pressure and the outcry following the gunshot aimed at Colonel Maya Johnson. He stated clearly that all recorded recorded footage would be stored in an independent system under multi-layered supervision so that every action could be retrieved if necessary. From the back rows, many reporters raised recorders. Cameras clicked non-stop as they understood this was a pivotal step, not only to ease public outrage, but to mark an unprecedented shift within the police structure. Next, another official stepped up to the podium holding a file boldly titled New Training Program. He explained that the Maya Johnson case would be included in the curriculum as a defining example to teach police recruits that every decision and action can alter a person's life and affect society's trust. On the large screen behind him, an image of Maya appeared along with the question she had asked in court, "Who protects me from the police?" The room fell silent. Many heads bowed as the weight of the message sank in. Reporters fired off questions about implementation costs and oversight mechanisms, but each was met with a clear response. Department leaders affirmed that this reform would not end as a promise, and that a concrete plan with strict timelines had already been put in place. They stressed that this change was essential to regain public trust, and that the lesson of Maya Johnson would remain a scar etched into the history of the police force. As the press conference ended, the atmosphere in the room remained heavy but tinged with hope. Outside crowds gathered in front of the headquarters watching the live broadcast on large screens, many nodding, some clapping in agreement. The reform might not erase all the darkness, but at the very least it proved that justice had begun to create real change. And from Maya's story, a new door to transparency in law enforcement had officially opened. In the large training room, hundreds of police recruits sat neatly in their seats with thick manuals bearing the department's official logo laid out before them. The atmosphere that day was unlike any ordinary lesson, as everyone knew the content they were about to read was directly tied to the case that had once shaken the entire nation. At the podium, the instructor spoke clearly and firmly, emphasizing that this was not a dry theoretical lecture, but a lesson written in the blood and tears of a woman who once swore to protect her country. When he paused, the hall fell into silence, broken only by the rustle of paper as the recruits opened to the first page. A young officer in the front row sat with his back straight, his hands gripping the manual tightly. The training lights cast a glow on his face, revealing a tense but determined expression. He bowed his head and read each line closely, his eyes following every sentence as if to etch it into memory. The page described in detail the moment Maya was pulled over, the insults hurled, the gunshot fired, and the truth that was later revealed. The more he read, the heavier his chest felt, but his eyes grew steadily brighter, filled with a resolve that seemed to strengthen him. Beside him, a fellow recruit glanced over, caught the stern look on his face, and instinctively straightened his posture in respect for the story. The atmosphere in the classroom transformed into a quiet space of remembrance. The instructor said little, allowing the silence to speak. Every bowed head, reading every pen, underlining key lines together, created a scene full of weight. The young officer gently raised his gaze toward the screen at the front where Maya's question appeared, "Who protects me from the police?" His eyes shone with determination, as if silently vowing that one day he would be the one to protect others like Maya should they ever appear again on this land. That solemn atmosphere gradually spread like an unspoken oath. The recruits began exchanging glances filled with empathy, reflection, and resolve. Some bit their lips, others quietly scribbled notes in the margins, reminding themselves that this moment must never be repeated. In their minds, Maya was no longer just a victim, but a mirror reflecting their own future responsibilities. A new sense of belief began to take shape in those eyes. It did not come from a rousing speech or a dry decree, but from a direct encounter between the young and the truth. Each page, each story, each name in the manual served as a reminder that power must come with responsibility, and that a police uniform is not a shield for abuse but a symbol of protection. That day, in the moment, they bowed their heads to read and lifted them again with steady eyes. Those young officers laid the foundation for a different generation, one determined to restore the trust that had been broken. Outside the training room, the sky was clear sunlight streaming through the large windows onto the polished tile floor. That scene felt like a sign of a new beginning. The young officers who stepped out of class that day did not carry indifference, but bore an invisible promise to society. That new sense of trust was still fragile, but it had been planted, and from the steadfast seeds within their hearts, justice would continue to grow. The military hall glowed under the solemn ceremony, the national flag hanging high behind the podium. Golden lights cast down over perfectly aligned rows of seats, and a dignified atmosphere filled the space. High-ranking officers, veterans, and military families packed the auditorium, all waiting for the moment dedicated to Maya Johnson, the woman who had become a symbol of courage and justice. The military band's deep, resonant music echoed through the hall, each note pounding in their chests as Maya made her way to the stage. Her shoulders still bore the wound that had not fully healed her bandaged arm, slowed her steps, but the brightness in her eyes and the gentle smile on her lips lit up the entire hall. The master of ceremonies solemnly called out her name, Maya Johnson, the sound reverberating throughout the room like a declaration of honor. The entire auditorium stood at once, hundreds of eyes locked on her, the air heavy with emotion. A military representative stepped forward to present her with the Medal of Honor, his hands slightly trembling as he pinned the gleaming insignia to her chest. The scene moved many to wipe away tears, for it was more than a decoration. It was an affirmation that her blood and tears had not been in vain, that her resilience had been recognized. As soon as the medal was presented, Maya's former comrades rose in unison, saluting her in military form. The sound of boots hitting the tiled floor rang out powerfully, synchronizing with the solemn music. The image of hundreds of soldiers saluting the comrade who had once stood beside them in battle, now standing tall after an excruciating trial on home soil, transformed the hall into an unforgettable portrait. Maya looked down at the seats below, seeing faces that had shared smoke and fire with her, now looking back with deep respect and unbreakable camaraderie. The room fell silent for a moment, then suddenly erupted in a thunderous round of applause, prolonged as though no one wanted it to end. People rose, cheering, even elderly veterans trembling as they lifted their hands in salute, eyes glistening. To them, Maya was not just a comrade, but a living testament to the bond between soldiers, one that endures through every circumstance. A light caught the gleaming medal on her chest, transforming it into a symbol for an entire generation. Maya stood still, took a deep breath, her eyes shining as she looked out at her former comrades, then bowed her head in gratitude. Her voice didn't need to be loud, but it carried clearly through the hall. This is not my honor alone. It belongs to all who have worn this uniform, to all who have once sworn to protect this country. I accept this medal on their behalf and on behalf of the justice that has been upheld. Her simple but powerful words sent a wave through the hall, followed once more by resounding applause. That ceremony was not merely an award presentation, but a defining milestone in the collective memory of the military. It affirmed that Maya, once shot down in injustice, had now become a symbol of honor within the very ranks she once served. And from the moment her comrades rose to salute her in unison, military pride, the spirit of brotherhood, and the belief in justice were reignited stronger than ever before. Maya stood tall at the center stage, the golden light casting a glow that made her face appear both radiant and resolute. The medal on her chest still shimmered, but her eyes were not fixed on it. They looked straight out at the packed auditorium. Hundreds waited in silence, clapping hands, stilled. Even their breath seemed to slow. She held the microphone, her voice calm yet weighty. Justice doesn't wear a uniform. It lives in every heart. The words echoed, needing no emphasis enough to draw the entire hall into complete silence. The moment felt suspended in time. Senior officers exchanged glances, eyes briefly moved. Young cadets sat upright, their faces lit with emotion. Elderly veterans clenched their hands, some closing their eyes as if to engrave the words in memory. Maya didn't need to say more, for that single sentence had drawn a clear line between the authority worn on the body and the justice held within the soul. It was not something granted by rank or insignia, but a choice each person must make when standing before injustice. As the ceremony ended, the media erupted. Journalists quickly ran the quote in bold headlines. Photos of Maya on stage, her eyes alight, appeared on the front pages of numerous newspapers. Social media was flooded with posts quoting her exact words, accompanied by the image of the medal gleaming under stage lights. Many users wrote a line to remember: simple truth, immense power. Justice lives in hearts, not on badges. Within hours, the quote had become a new rallying cry in discussions, community groups, and ongoing protests across multiple cities. Posters of Maya with the words "Justice lives in our hearts" appeared on city streets, held high in the peaceful marches. On campuses, students debated passionately, many choosing the quote as the title of their essays, treating it as a fresh definition of fairness. In military barracks, young officers shared the moment, taking it as a reminder that their duty lies not only on the battlefield but also in protecting the dignity of the people. International news networks also quoted and commented that Maya's speech transcended the boundaries of a medal ceremony, touched the hearts of millions, reminding humanity that justice is a shared value, not defined by skin color, religion, or rank. The statement spread from Washington to Europe, Asia, and Africa, becoming a topic of debate in news programs and editorial columns. Every line, every report, every shared video came together to amplify that simple yet profound message. In Maya's hometown, many young people painted her words in graffiti across walls, adding a bright red heart to symbolize belief. These murals were quickly photographed and shared online, turning into street symbols. From a short statement, Maya had ignited a spirit that brought communities together in the belief that justice begins in the human heart. And it was this very ripple effect that made her not just an honored military colonel, but a living symbol of unwavering faith in fairness. On a major city street, once the gathering point for thousands of protesters, an old concrete wall suddenly became a new focal point. A group of street artists spent several nights completing a massive graffiti mural covering the entire surface in bold, vibrant colors. At the center, Maya Johnson's image rose proudly, her face looking straight ahead, eyes bright with unshakable belief. Each stroke was rendered with care, capturing both strength and softness, reflecting the spirit of a woman who had stood firm in the face of injustice. Against a blazing red background symbolizing blood and struggle, Maya's portrait emerged as an unerasable icon. Just below the portrait, a large phrase was spray-painted in striking white: "Justice never dies." The words stretched across the wall's width like a solemn vow, etched into the hearts of all who saw it. Passers-by stopped to look, some taking photos, some gently placing a hand on the wall, others bowing their heads in silent prayer. The short but powerful slogan quickly became the movement's motto, appearing on t-shirts, banners, and even on other smaller walls across the city. It was no longer just a phrase, it became a shared conviction that justice might be delayed, but would never die. By day, the mural drew crowds of people, students, veterans, mothers with children, and everyday workers. They stood, looked, and talked about what it meant. At night, as streetlights cast a glow over the wall, the graffiti's colors lit up even brighter, and Maya's image seemed to come alive in the dark, staring ahead with pride. Young people gathered to take pictures and share them online, turning the site into a symbolic landmark. Videos of the wall spread rapidly, racking up millions of views, embedding it firmly into the ongoing narrative. Local newspapers began writing about the graffiti, calling it the Wall of Justice. Some art critics said it was more than a street mural, it was a cultural symbol of the times, capturing a historic moment when the community stood up for fairness. Young soldiers passing by also stopped, eyes fixed, hearing Maya's words echo in their minds. Justice doesn't wear a uniform, it lives in every heart. The mural, therefore, wasn't just an image, it became a lasting message that tied together the past, present, and future. Day by day, more people came to the wall, many bringing flowers and candles to place in front of it, turning the site into a pilgrimage of belief. Red roses and flickering candles glowing in the night wind created a space that felt both solemn and sacred. The sound of a street guitar played nearby somber melodies blending with the brilliant light of the graffiti, forming an atmosphere like a living memorial. For everyone present, pausing before the wall wasn't just about looking, it was a way to affirm the belief that justice, once ignited, would never fade. The graffiti wall gradually became an irreplaceable symbol of the city mentioned in every conversation about justice and belief, proved that an image, a line of words, when born from truth and courage, could transcend art and become a voice shared by society. And from Maya's proud gaze on the wall, people found the strength to keep moving forward, to believe that justice, no matter how tested, still lives on in the hearts of people. That first evening after the mural was completed, residents began bringing fresh bouquets, mostly red roses, placing them directly beneath the wall. A gentle fragrance filled the air, mixing with the mural's vivid colors, making the scene feel both mournful and proud. As darkness fell, the glow of small candles lit up in neat rows, softly illuminating the towering portrait of Maya. Her proud eyes seemed to shine even brighter at night, reflecting an unshakable belief in justice. People stood silently, no chants needed, only quiet, bowed heads, each leaving a prayer in their minds. Gradually, the crowd grew larger. Some mothers brought their children, laying down flowers while softly explaining why this place had become sacred. Elderly veterans came with canes, slowly lighting candles before lifting their eyes toward the wall, their gaze wet but unwavering. Young people arrived with cameras capturing the moment and posting it online with the words, "Justice never dies," turning a simple gesture into a ripple of unity. No one needed an invitation. People simply came as if drawn by an invisible thread, gathering together around that wall. Over time, the scene became more than a quiet gathering. People began calling the spot the city's temple of justice. Each evening, hundreds of candles glowed, thousands of flowers were laid down, filling the street with color and light. The sound of a guitar echoed soft, somber notes, sometimes joined by a lone voice, singing simple yet haunting. The atmosphere was so reverent that even passers-by paused, bowed their heads for a moment, then quietly continued on their way. Foreign journalists arrived, capturing images and writing articles about the mural and the spontaneous candlelight vigil. They called it a justice pilgrimage, a form of communal practice where people came to remember, to seek faith, and to affirm that the value of justice cannot be extinguished. Images of flickering candles beneath the graffiti wall appeared on the front pages of numerous international newspapers alongside headlines about America's reckoning with abuse of power. A story from one street corner had crossed borders, becoming a symbol of global belief. Night after night, the wall remained aglow with candlelight, the scent of flowers carried on the breeze. Small notes were taped to the base of the wall bearing messages like, "We believe in you. Justice lives on. We will not be silent anymore." People came and went, but the space was never empty as new footsteps arrived each day. The mural was no longer just a work of art. It had become a vessel for hope, a destination for those seeking to reclaim their belief in truth. From that point on, the giant graffiti wall was more than a striking image in the heart of the city. It became a pilgrimage site for justice. Citizens viewed coming here to light candles and lay flowers as a spiritual ritual, a way to remind themselves and future generations that faith and fairness must never fade. In the flickering glow of thousands of candles, Maya's face appeared clearly proud and eternal, like a flame guiding the long journey of a community standing against injustice. In the large university lecture hall, light from the projector cast a glow over rows of neatly seated students. The atmosphere was far more solemn than usual because today's lesson wasn't just theory, it was a living piece of history. The professor stood at the podium, remote in hand, and pressed a button to play the familiar video. The room fell completely silent, filled only with the sharp sound of gunfire echoing from the speakers and the image of Maya raising her hands before collapsing in a spreading red stain on her shirt. Many students furrowed their brows, some covered their mouths, and others sat upright, eyes locked on the screen. When the video paused, the room remained heavy with silence until the professor turned and spoke in a low voice. "This is the truth that once shook the entire country. The question is, how will you choose to see it?" Immediately, the energy in the room shifted. A student stood up, voice shaky but firm. "If it were me, what would I do? I don't think I could stay silent. I'd raise my phone, I'd speak out." The class erupted into discussion, hands shooting up, voices eager to respond. One student argued that brave actions aren't always easy, that fear is constant, but they still believed justice needed to be protected by every individual's voice. Another added, "If the truth is buried, we're left with nothing but fear. I don't want to live in that kind of society." The professor listened quietly, his eyes scanning each face lit with passion. He didn't interrupt, allowing the wave of discussion to sweep through the class. Urgent questions were raised. How can one person stand against power? How many people must speak up before the truth can't be silenced? Students debated not just with logic, but with unease and hope. They didn't see the video as old footage, but as a mirror reflecting the responsibility of their generation. Gradually, that lively atmosphere turned into a quiet strength binding everyone in the room. Students who were usually silent began to speak, sharing fears, but also voicing beliefs. They started jotting down ideas, some quoting Maya's words, others sketching the image of the graffiti wall from the street. In that moment, they were no longer just young people listening to a lecture. They were citizens fully aware of their role in shaping society. When the class ended, the professor gave a slight nod, his eyes glowing with pride. He knew Maya's legacy didn't reside in court rulings or news reports, but had reached into the classroom, planting seeds in a new generation. As students stepped out of the lecture hall, their discussions continued, voices echoing down the stairs, through the halls, and across the campus. The question, "If it were me, what would I do?" lingered in their minds, a small but steady flame urging each of them to speak out when faced with injustice. And from that very classroom, Maya Johnson's legacy extended beyond a personal story to become a living lesson in justice, etched into the hearts of an entire generation. Inside the lecture hall, after the video played, the debate erupted. The atmosphere had completely shifted. First, only a few voices spoke up, but gradually, even students who rarely participated began to stand and share. No one stayed silent because each felt that by remaining quiet, they would unknowingly repeat the mistake of those who once turned their backs on injustice. Some spoke of their fear of witnessing violence on the streets. Others recalled personal experiences of being unfairly profiled, and all agreed that the answer was not to bow down but to speak up. Their voices rang out in unison, merging into a chorus of belief where truth could no longer be hidden in the dark. The professor sat quietly listening, a faint smile on his face, his eyes filled with pride. He knew this moment meant more than any lecture could because his students were learning through lived connection, through empathy with a real human being. When one student stood up and declared, "If justice stays silent, we won't," the entire room erupted in applause, a thunderous round that felt like a collective vow. No one remained a passive observer. They had all become part of the story, extending Maya Johnson's legacy through their own thoughts and resolve. Outside, the afternoon sun lit up the campus courtyard as groups of students left the lecture hall, still deep in conversation. They weren't only talking about Maya, but also about their generation's responsibility in holding justice. One group decided to start a club to promote awareness of human rights, and others began planning an open forum to share personal stories. These small actions, born from the emotion of a single class session, quickly turned into tangible tangible commitments. Each step forward, each conversation became a seed planted in the soil of belief. News of that atmosphere quickly spread. A few students shared videos from the lecture hall capturing the moment when the entire class stood up in applause, accompanied by captions declaring, "We will not stay silent." Within hours, the clip was shared tens of thousands of times, becoming proof that collective strength can grow from seemingly small moments. No one expected a college lecture to ignite a widespread wave of discussion, but that is exactly how justice spreads from a classroom to a city, then out into the world. Maya wasn't there, but her name was mentioned again and again. To the students, she was not only a colonel or a witness in a courtroom, but someone who had planted in them the seed of belief. They looked into her calm eyes, and the footage listened again to her words. Justice doesn't wear a uniform, it lives in every heart, and realized that they, too, had a responsibility to turn belief into action. Each time her name came up, silence gave way to resolve, and they felt that they were continuing the story, not just listening to it. Day by day, that change kept spreading. One student wrote a long essay asserting that justice doesn't come from distant resolutions, but from the courage to capture a moment to speak out to defend truth even when you feel small. The essay was shared across campus and adopted by several professors as reference material. Subsequent lectures no longer felt dry because whenever justice was mentioned, students had a vivid example to cite, and they didn't hesitate to debate passionately to defend their views. Maya's story came to a close, but her legacy did not. In the hearts of those who heard, who saw, who stood up, the flame of justice continued to smolder, ready to flare when injustice appeared. Justice lives in small acts, from holding up a phone to record the truth to sharing a call for help, or simply speaking up when someone is being oppressed. No one stayed silent anymore because everyone understood that silence is complicity. And so the story ended with a bright belief: justice is not distant. It lives in every heart, nurtured by every small act until it becomes a powerful force that transforms an entire society. The story closes in the light of lecture halls where students are asked to debate with passion, but to fully grasp its weight, one must look back at the journey that unfolded. From a quiet afternoon on a deserted highway when Maya Johnson was stopped under the harsh sun and a gaze full of contempt, to the breathless court hearings and solemn ceremonies of recognition, each moment stands as proof of the fierce clash between injustice and justice. From the moment Maya collapsed with a bleeding wound to when she stood firm in court with steady eyes, then appeared on national television with a calm voice, every step created a continuous thread that turned personal pain into collective belief. What made the difference was not just the court's rulings, but the way society spoke out together. The crowds in the square, the witnesses who dared to tell the truth, the words that spread across social media, and the vividly painted graffiti walls all proved that justice does not belong to one person but is the result of millions of small actions. People did not stay silent in the face of injustice. They chose to record, to share, to debate, and to act, turning truth into strength. That very chorus turned Maya from a victim into a symbol and left those who abused power with no place to hide. In the military hall, when Maya received her medal, the moment her former comrades stood to salute confirmed that her dignity, and that of all honest soldiers, was still honored. On national television, the statement, "Justice doesn't wear a uniform. It lives in every heart," moved beyond the talk show stage to become a global rallying cry. On the streets, the graffiti wall with the words, "Justice never dies," and the thousands of candles and flowers turned that place into a spiritual gathering point where the community came to nurture its faith. And in the classroom, the question, "What would I do?" awakened a younger generation, helping them understand that justice isn't some distant concept, but a personal responsibility carried in every decision. The greatest lesson from Maya Johnson's story is the power of steadfastness. She did not choose to confront with violence, nor did she lose her composure in the face of insults, but held on to her calm and her belief in what was right. In doing doing so, she showed that dignified silence can sometimes speak louder than any scream, making the truth ring even clearer. The next lesson is the value of action. If there had been no witness brave enough to come forward, if Briggs hadn't confessed in a haunted moment, if the community had remained silent, perhaps justice would have once again been buried. Every individual, no matter how small, can play a part in creating change. The story also affirms that reform is inevitable. From the regulations requiring body cameras to the incorporation of Maya's case into training materials, everything shows that society did not let the pain fade away in vain. It was turned into momentum to reform the system, to help young officers understand that power only has meaning when used to protect people. This stands as proof that loss, when acknowledged properly, can become the foundation for change. And, in the end, what remains is not outrage or tears, but faith. Faith that justice, once ignited, will never be extinguished. Faith that small actions, a simple tap to record a confession, a chant in a public square, or a single sentence in a classroom, can each become a spark that fuels the larger fire of truth. Maya's legacy is not confined to medals or a massive mural, but lives in the hearts of millions who witnessed, who listened, who stood up. And the story closes in that very light, a light that reminds us justice lives in every small act, and that together those acts will build a more just society.